Hi, welcome back to 5 Good Questions. I'm your host, Jake Taylor. Our guest today is John Burke. John serves as the president of Trek Bicycle Corporation and has been its CEO since 1997. He's served as chairman of the President's Council on Physical Fitness and Sports. John is an avid cyclist who has finished Ironman Wisconsin twice, as well as completing the Boston and New York marathons. Today we're going to be discussing his book, 12 Simple Solutions to Save America. John has a wealth of common sense. Let's ask him 5 good questions. Welcome back to the show, everybody. My guest today is John Burke, author of 12 Simple Solutions to Save America. Hey, John, thanks for taking the time to be with us today.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
One thing I wanted to jump into before we actually get to the questions was, you're a successful CEO, busy. I'm sure you've got plenty of things to work on. Why go through the heartache and trouble that writing a book can entail? What was your motivation?
My son, Richie, graduated from Marquette in 2011, and I saw on the graduation invite, David McCullough was the speaker, and he's an American historian, author, some great books, and I was really looking forward to it because I had read a bunch of his books. And he gets to the end of the commencement address, and he looks out over at the kids, and he's in his 80s, and he was really emphatic, and he looked out and he said, at some point in your life, do something for your country. And in 2011, I was a little concerned about the direction of our country, and I just finished writing a book about my dad. And I really liked writing the book, and I've spent my life working at Trek solving problems. And I've always liked history, and I've always been interested in the country, so I thought, what I could do is I could write a really simple book about how to save America. And so that's what I did. And so I spent, almost 5 years writing a really simple book. It's only 124 pages on how we could really take better care of our great country.
That's great. I think it's a perfect way to kick off for question number one. And one of the things I really liked about the book was that it's you come from the source of an independent rather than a partisan. You're drawing good ideas from both sides of the aisle. How do we break this, what seems to me like a stranglehold over the system between the two parties?
I think the first thing is I think individually Americans need to think for themselves more and not become aligned with political parties. To me, political parties are almost like unions. They tell you which way to vote. I mean, you see in this election, Republicans are against free trade. And 4 years ago or 8 years ago, they're for free trade. And everybody gets caught up in this tastes great, less filling battle between two titanic unions, and they really don't represent what individual voters think. So I think the first responsibility is to the voter themselves to make up their own mind. I think the second thing is just dealing with money and politics. This has become a giant business. And really what politics should be is it should be government of the people, by the people, and for the people, and not government of the political parties. And these parties, to run for president this year, you have to raise $1 billion. And when you're getting those big donation checks, you owe people something. And so their agenda goes to the top, not the people's agenda. And I think that's how you get the political parties out, is you deal with the issue about money and politics.
So that's I think a perfect segue for question number two. So you have 12 solutions, and all of them seem very logical, straightforward to me. What are the 3 specific ones that you might pick out if we had to let's focus and let's just get a couple, maybe the lowest hanging fruit, or maybe what we'd consider the prime movers that would do the most, have the biggest impact if we could pull them off?
Okay, well, kind of narrowing it down to 3 is kind of like picking, which are your favorite kids. I really like all the solutions, but I'll just pick out a couple. One is, if you take a look at the 3 branches of government, the executive branch, the judicial branch, and the legislative branch, the lowest performing branch of government is Congress. It's got an approval rating of less than 12%. It didn't pass a budget between 2009 for 2013. You're supposed to have an annual budget, and they never passed one. That kind of performance would never be tolerated. And if you take a look at elections in Congress, 92% are won by the candidate who raises the most amount of money. And Congress is really in charge of the nation's checkbook. And we're $19 trillion in debt. So the first thing I'd do is I'd go in there and I'd fix Congress. And in the book, I think I put together maybe 6 or 7 really simple solutions for fixing Congress. And the first one is to install term limits. You know, you got Congress people running every 2 years. And I say, no, in the House, they should run every 4 years. In the Senate, they should run 4 years, just like the presidency. And you have 2 4-year terms for the president. Let's make it 2 4-year terms for everybody. And then you're done. And I also say in the book, if you have a net worth of over $2 million, let's serve for free. It's called public service. Public service is not making $176,000 a year, getting a huge pension, and getting a gold-plated health care program.
Or starting your own foundation and giving speeches for millions of dollars.
Right? But, you know, you take a look, in 1973, 3% of Congress people went on to become lobbyists. Today, it's over 40% of those Congress people cash in to become, you know, lobbyists making millions of dollars a year. And I really think that Congress should reflect the American people. So I think one of the simplest changes we could make is to go in there, put term limits in Congress. The other thing that I suggest in my book is you've got 435 people in Congress. It's crazy. How can you make a decision with 435 people? I mean, just think about a board of directors or think about a school board trying to make decisions. We've got a government body that has 435 people, and I go through the logic of you could bring that down to 220 people. You could narrow the amount of people in Congress. You could get more done. You could have more compromise because you'd have better relationships. And we're $19 trillion in debt. You would have a huge cost savings because you'd get rid of 200 congressional districts, all the staffs, and you'd reduce the cost of government.
Yeah, that's an interesting concept of, if you think about like Dunbar's law, which is basically anytime you get more than 150 people in a group, the people stop really knowing each other very well. And so there's a lot more free riding. There's less compromise. It becomes someone you don't know, so you kind of don't care about screwing them over. So if you're able to keep a smaller number, which is kind of what humans have naturally, gravitated towards, whether it was in tribes or military units, or tend to be about 150 people, then you know who you're fighting for and who you're fighting with.
Yeah, and I think in this case, and some people say, well, that's crazy. It's not crazy. We need to think about this government as it's our government. A democracy is of the people, by the people, and for the people. And right now, it's not working. So insanity, Einstein once said insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. If we want a different result, we got to make some changes. And I mean big changes.
Yeah.
And this is a change. If you went in there and said, let's take Congress from 435 and knock it down to 220, that would be a big change. If you said, we're going to have term limits and you can't serve in Congress for 36 years, you've got 8 years. Be a public servant and then go back home and do your work. Those are specific changes. I talk about getting rid of gerrymandering, which is an absolute joke. It doesn't serve the people at all. That can be done. Congress can be fixed, and that's the first one that I would address. The second of the three, because you granted me three
wishes.
Second of the three is I would fix Social Security. I think Social Security has done so much for hundreds of millions of people. When Roosevelt enacted Social Security in the mid-30s, he said, we want to take care of people in their older age. We want to take care of people who have a physical disability. This is a program that's worked incredibly well. And it hangs by a financial thread, and we haven't had anybody in Washington do anything about it. The current program and the way it's funded is we pay 6% of our wages up until $116,000. Over that, you pay zero. So let's just say 6% of $116,000, it's about $8,000 a year. That's what you pay. That's where you max out at. So if you make $100,000 a year, you're paying $6,000. If you make $1 million a year, you're paying $8,000. So you're only paying $2,000 more if you make $900,000 more a year. If you make $10 million a year,
Still 8.
you're paying $8,000. And all you need to do is scrap the cap. It would bring in $132 billion a year, and it would solve Social Security. Just one thing. And what we do in this country is we try and solve these problems with super complicated solutions. That's one simple solution that saves one incredible program for hundreds of millions of people in the next 30 years. Done. My third is I would cut the defense budget. And, it's really interesting because you see these political elections and people are like, I'm for a strong military. I'd increase military spending. And one of the things we really lack in our political discussion are facts. And so one of the things I tried to do in the book is I tried to say, here's 12 problems, here are all the facts, and here are simple solutions. And if you take a look at where we are as a country, we're 4% of the world's population. We spend 42% of the world's military dollars. We spend more money than the next 7 nations combined. $620 billion a year. And if you go through that military budget, you could easily reduce that military budget by $200 billion. That could be done. That's the third thing I'd do.
Yeah. So question number 3, it seems like there's this paradigm that's maybe a false one that's set up of, on one side, they want to do more with more money, and the other side wants to do less with less money, even though that's kind of hasn't been true for the last 12 years or so, but whatever. Right. But with, the whole point of technology is to do more with less resources. How come there doesn't seem to be any party or anyone saying, hey, can we do more with less? And it kind of, maybe the better way of just saying that question is, why do we have such a low performance government, and how can we fix that?
I think it goes back to something we've already talked about, and I think most of our political leaders care more about themselves than they do about the country. So they're in this titanic battle between Republicans and Democrats to see who has the power and who can stay in power and who can raise the most amount of money to get reelected. And we don't have people who really care about the future of this country. I mean, we're $19 trillion in debt. We've just gone through an election season that's lasted a year and a half. And can you tell me one specific idea that either candidate has had about reducing expenses in our government? $19 trillion in debt. There aren't any. None. Yeah. And so, I go through that book and I got, you can reduce defense spending by $200 billion. You can increase Social Security to pay for the program. You can reduce the size of Congress. You can actually do things like reduce gun violence, because right now in the United States, there's 75,000 people who get maimed by gunfire, and the cost of cleaning that mess up is $200 billion a year. We can go to our healthcare system, which right now, if you take a look at it, there's a law passed that prohibits the government from negotiating drug prices. And the reason that's in place is because the pharmaceutical industry spends so much money in campaign donations and lobbying Congress that they bought the votes to hold their profits. You could absolutely slash healthcare spending in this country if you started to work for the people instead of the special interest.
One thing that I found interesting, I remember in 2008, 2009 timeframe, I went and I looked at the campaign contributions from all the biggest banks, and then I looked at the TARP amounts that they got, the bailouts, and I was actually they got such an incredible return on investment there. It's actually surprising how cheap it is to buy off the government. In a lot of the numbers are not as big as the amount of money that they're making in other areas. It's surprisingly small to me sometimes. To influence government. If you're a big business, to influence government, it's incredibly cheap. That's why so many people do it. There's a great return. So all I need to do is donate. Take that mechanism away and.
So you take that mechanism away, and you need to start to make decisions that are in the best interest of the people. One a really smart guy gave the book to, and he read the book, and he got back to me. He says, you know what? I agree with every single thing you said in that book. And he goes, and the reason I do is you lay out all the facts, and if you put a bunch of smart people in a room and you give them all the facts, 95% of the time they'll come to the same conclusion. And what we need to do in this country is we need to have a much better discussion about what are the real facts. And we go through this incredible election season, and nobody talks about any of the facts. I mean, listen to those 3 debates. It's an embarrassment.
Yeah, I don't
we
feel
have
like
so many,
I don't feel
we
like
have
I
so
heard
many
any.
real problems in this country, and we don't talk about them.
Yeah, it seems like we're stuck on the small problems to avoid talking about the big problems.
Yeah, we are.
So, question number 4, and we covered this a little bit about Social Security, but what do you think happens to Social Security if we don't fix it? Do we just slowly default through? I mean, it's going to be a huge liability that's out there pending. Do we default through printing and just kind of watering down that fixed liability? I mean, what happens if we don't actually, someone has the courage to tackle that third rail?
I think ultimately what happens is you're going to get to the end of the road, and the money's not going to be there, and so ultimately somebody's going to appear on television and say, my fellow Americans, we're at the end of the road. People have been talking about this for the last 50 years, but nobody ever did anything. So all this money that you paid in, we're not going to be able to pay it back to you. And that's going to be a really sad day. And so what leadership is all about, and I think this is another problem that we have in this country, is we don't have good leadership. Leadership isn't running around figuring out what people want and going, here's a treat for you, and here's a treat for you. Leadership is talking about problems, and it's telling people the truth and having adult conversations to saying, listen, here's the deal. We need to do this. It might be really unpopular, but we need to do this, and this is why we need to do it. That's what leadership is about. And I think Social Security is such an amazing program. It's done so much for so many people over 75 years. We need to have an adult conversation with the American people and say, this is what the program's done. This is where it is right now. And we need to make these 2 changes, just 2 changes, and we're clear.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to do it.
No. So question number 5, the tax code. I know you almost don't even need to say anything else at this point, but how do we fix this monstrous problem where it's so overly complicated, and it allows the ability to play favorites and game the system, and you have huge corporations not paying any taxes, and how do we fix this?
I mean, it's unbelievable.
It is unbelievable.
So the tax code, you ask people how many pages is the tax code? The tax code is 74,000 pages long. Well, who can read 74,000 pages? Not even a lawyer can read 74,000 pages. So nobody knows what the game is. And the other thing is the game always changes. It's something like in the last 15 years, there have been 4,600 changes to the tax code. So imagine watching an NFL game where they've made 4,600 changes to the rules in the last 10 years. You can't do it.
I saw one report where they gave like 4 or 5 of the biggest tax preparers the same information, and they came back with wildly different results as far as what the tax bill should have been paid. I mean, it's right. So subjective at that point.
So I go back to a point that you made earlier about technology, and isn't the real goal of technology to make things simpler so that you can deploy resources in other areas to improve the quality of life? So you take a look at what we have with technology. You should get your taxes sent to you and say, you made $78,000 last year, and this is how much you owe in taxes, and you should sign it. You're done. So I really believe that the way you start out with this is you say, we're going to have a 10-page tax system. That's it. You can fit all you want into that 10 pages, but it's only going to be 10 pages. We're done.
You better specify how big the print can be.
Yeah. There you go. Well, we'll let them even make it single space, but you have to set boundaries. You know, when I'm involved with the team and I need to make an ask of the team, I put boundaries on what I ask for. And I think the American people own the government, and we should look at the government and say, this is what we'd like. We'd like a tax system that we can understand. So would you make it 10 pages or less? And that can be done.
Yeah.
All of these things, we've done so many amazing things as a country. We've accomplished so much. I mean, look at all the great things, whether it's World War I or saving the world in World War II or sending somebody to the moon. Look at all the humanitarian efforts that the United States has led. Look at all the amazing things that we've done. We can certainly take an out-of-control tax system and get it done.
There's a great quote, and I'm going to probably butcher it. It's by this guy named D. Hawk, who was the founder of Visa, kind of the originator of Visa. And he said, basically, simple rules lead to intelligent behavior, but complicated rules lead to stupid behavior.
And that's exactly what we have.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's I hope that at some point there's a swing back in everyone taking some responsibility for themselves and for feeling like they want to give back some more and not just worried about what they can get out of the system.
So you know what I think? I think to your point, which is a really good point, if you take a historic view of this and take a look at 1961 at the inauguration and take a look at President Kennedy giving his inauguration, and he says, ask not what the country can do for you, ask what you can do for the country. And the reason that became such a famous quote is because that's who we are as a people. And take a look at where we've come as a country in the last 60 years, and we've become the big me. We focus on ourselves. We have everybody at the trough. What tax cut can I get? What program can government do for me? I hate the government. Everybody's just piling on. And government's broken. And it's time for people to say, you know what? Here's how I can help out. Here's how I can help the government. This is what I can do, because we've all benefited from this amazing country. But man, we're doing our best to kill it.
Yeah. So bonus question we always ask is for a book recommendation. And what do you have for us today?
I go with The Power of Habit. And this is a book I read maybe 3 or 4 years ago. And the first 5 chapters are phenomenal. And it really talks about the CEO of Alcoa and Paul O'Neill. And it talks about him going to Alcoa and focusing on worker safety. And he's talking to a bunch of analysts, and he's talking about how he's going to turn Alcoa around by focusing on worker safety. And this is in the early 80s. He gets done with the speech, and everybody runs to the phone banks, picks up the phone, calls the office, and says, sell. And O'Neill's premise was, if all we do is focus on worker safety, it's going to drive processes throughout the business. And by doing that, we'll increase profitability and customer satisfaction. And he was right, and Alcoa just went through the roof. And this guy's whole premise for the book is, you don't have to be good at everything. You don't have to get everything right. You just got to get 1 or 2 big things right. And that's my whole thing with, this is a complicated country that we have. All we need to do is focus on 12 things in this country. If you get these 12 things right, which I've written about in the book, it'll ripple through the entire country, and it'll make a massive difference.
Well, those are great points. And John, I think you wrote a book that everyone should read, that I think especially anybody in a leadership position that wanted to stiffen their backbone and get in there and make a real difference. This is a great blueprint, and it's easy enough to read that anybody can understand it, and is chock full of great data, really, of what the problems are, and it is that adult conversation.
It is. Thank you very much for having me.
It's been a pleasure.
All right, great. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this interview. If you'd like to support this author and purchase their book, click here. If you'd like to become a subscriber to 5GQ, click here. And I included a couple other interviews that you might appreciate right here. Thanks, happy reading.